The Congressional Human Rights Caucus is very pleased to open this hearing on human rights issues in Yugoslavia.
I made a statement because I obviously am talking about Serbia, not Slovenia, not Croatia, not Bosnia, because those republics are doing a good job.
Mr. DioGuardi, I ask you a specific question, and that question concerned the rise of the decrease of communism all over Yugoslavia.
Which I applaud, except in Serbia.
Right. Mr. DioGuardi, you made some very inflammatory statements here.
I did, because Mr. Milosevic has been very inflammatory against the Albanians, and someone has to speak up against him, and thank God we have the Congress of the United States to stand up for oppressed people, including the Kosovars.
Yes, but Mr. DioGuardi, you need to be accurate when you're a witness, especially when you're a lobbyist for a group.
I'm an ethnic Albanian.
Now you have to be accurate.
I'm an ethnic Albanian. I'm an ethnic Albanian. I'm the president of the Albanian American Civic League and the Albanian American Foundation, and I resent those intonations.
Okay, let me begin by introducing one of our great supporters, and let me say this, it's going to be difficult to say the word great because everyone here is great tonight. Freedom is a very precious commodity. Thomas Paine, 200 years ago, when this great country was being born, much like Kosova is being reborn today for freedom, Thomas Paine, in his crisis papers, said it best when he said, "These are the times that try men's souls." We have new Thomas Paines today, new Thomas Jeffersons, new George Washingtons, new Skanderbegs. We have people like Congressman Tom Lantos. Congressman Tom Lantos and his beautiful wife Annette know tyranny. They fled from the Nazi concentration camps. They're ethnic Hungarian Jews, and they know it was Raoul Wallenberg that saved him. He knows tyranny. He knows what it means to be without freedom, and he's never forgotten it once. And now the United States of America is so lucky to have someone with the background of Tom Lantos. And when you get Tom, you get Annette. Let's say hello to Tom Lantos. He was there for us in the beginning. He's been there for us all the way, and he is no doubt in my mind the most important person we have for changing the misguided policy of our State Department that is trying to stay neutral today on the issue of human rights in Kosova. So I give you that great senator from Kansas, Senator Bob Dole. Dole! Dole!
How many thousand people do you have? 10,000. Yeah. A lot of people on the grass all the way back.
Free Kosova! Free Kosova! Free Kosova! Free Kosova! Free Kosova! Free Kosova! Free Kosova!
All these American flags, isn't that beautiful?
Free Kosova! Free Kosova!
These are the terrorists, so-called terrorists. Well, let me say, first of all, I'm very honored to be here. Very honored to be with my good friend Bill DioGuardi and many others who are in the audience. And I believe in freedom, and I believe in human rights, and I believe it ought to happen in Kosovo at the earliest possible time. We cannot let people be subject to tyranny anymore, oppression anymore. People are entitled to their freedom, they're entitled to their basic rights. And so I agree with the friend, free Kosovo, and do it now. Free Kosova. In the world where every day freedom is breaking out all over, Kosovo should be no exception. There should be freedom in Kosovo. There should be freedom in Albania. There should be freedom everywhere in the world. And if I believe we're fortunate. Those of us who live here, Albanian Americans, wherever you may be from, we have democracy, but we want to make certain it's not denied, as I said earlier, to your friends and to your relatives and to your brothers and to your sisters and all the people in Albania, all the people in Kosovo. And I'll do my best, and I'm certain I can speak for many of my colleagues, regardless of their political party, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. We're in this together. We all either believe in democracy or we don't. And we believe in democracy just as you believe in democracy. And we'll be urging the State Department to take a tougher stand and take a proper stand for freedom and human rights everywhere in the world. Let's stop the oppression. Let's stop the abuse of human rights. Let's stand up for freedom everywhere, just as we stand up for freedom in America. Thank you very much. We'll be on your side.
A magnificent propaganda machine in Belgrade, and I found the article. It was in the New York Times, September 13th. Truth is a casualty of the partisan Yugoslav press. This is written by our press in the New York Times. And their propaganda, and especially since they monopolized the media, it's difficult for the Albanians to contend with that propaganda. We can answer a lot of the assertions that were made, and we won't. But I think there's one thing, getting back to State Department policy, that you should be aware of. Because I believe that the most important aspect of this meeting, Mr. Chairman, is that the State Department address the issue of its accountability to all the people in Yugoslavia. And obviously, we have concerns of a national security point of view. There's no question about that. But one of the things that I would want to alert you to, that you may be aware of already, is that the current leader has expansionist goals. There's no question. Even in the press recently, he announced his designs on parts of Croatia. He literally wants to come back to the greater Serbian dream that was there years ago. He's used that in Kosova to get elected, and he's not stopping. And this is the problem that we're now seeing with Croatia. He would love to see Slovenia leave. He'd love to see Croatia leave if he can keep part of that Dalmatian coast, which would be very dangerous, and I'll tell you why in a minute, because he knows he can subjugate the Macedonians, the Montenegrins, and the Albanians. He literally has a design for Greater Serbia. He doesn't care if Yugoslavia breaks up, as long as he keeps all of Kosova, and he's able to deal with the others. But our State Department better do a better job than they did in Kuwait. Because if we had been positioned in that part of the world, and our intelligence was better, we wouldn't be losing men right now and women on the front. We had to react. And we shouldn't be reacting right now. We should have been better. They're making the same mistake today in Yugoslavia. Because we know that if Serbia gets its designs and they then get a warm water port, we are now playing into the hands of the Soviet Union. They've been looking for that warm water port for years. And let me tell you, Mr. Milosevic and Mr. Gorbachev have a very comfortable relationship. They've met many times for hours in private rooms, and I don't know what they're talking about, but our State Department better be put on notice that if Slobodan Milosevic gets his way, and somehow Serbia extends to the warm waters, we will undermine another State Department policy, and that's keeping the Soviet Union away from a warm water port in that area.
Joseph DioGuardi is a former congressman from New York and also president of the Albanian American Civic League. He is with me in the studio this morning. You think we should have a role to play?
Absolutely. We have let Mr. Milosevic get away literally with murder. Don't forget, this didn't start last year. It started in 1989 when he walked in with tremendous military force and brutality to take away the autonomy of this province of Kosova, which is made up of 92% ethnic Albanian and less than 5% Serbian. It had its own self-government, it had its own school system, everything about it was separate, and then he literally took it over and all Albanians were fired from their jobs. So there's been a human rights record, second to none in brutality, certainly since the Nazi regime of World War II, and our State Department has known this. And why we let this go for 10 years is beyond me, and why Mr. Holbrooke did not allow the Albanians to sit at the Dayton Accord so that we could deal with this issue of Kosova at the time we settled Bosnia, which is not quite settled, as you know, is beyond me.
The Pentagon is saying now that absolutely no consideration is given, or is being given, to sending in troops either from Canada or the United States.
Well, we already have a force in Macedonia. I can't believe that they're not considering right now to expand that force, that protection force made up now of U.S. troops and Norwegian troops. I believe it totals about 600. It seems to me that the only answer right now is to show resolve. We didn't show it for 2 years in Bosnia, and we lost 200,000 people, and we had a conflagration there second to none.
Let me ask you this. The ministers of the European Union are suggesting that further sanctions should be imposed in Belgrade. Is that going to work?
Sanctions don't seem to work with Mr. Milosevic. That's what the hearing was all about. We did get a very tough resolution. It was made even tougher because of the efforts of the Albanian American Civic League that represents the concerns of 400,000 ethnic Albanians here in America. But sanctions will not be enough. We need to show resolve. We should move an aircraft carrier off the coast of Montenegro. Let it stay there. We should ring Serbia with troops. Let them stay there. If we see one move, and don't forget, Ralph, two presidents drew a line in the sand. President Bush on the way out and President Clinton on the way in said if there's any military or paramilitary action in Kosova, we would move swiftly. That question was put to Mr. Gelbard, Ambassador Gelbard, and he said that foreign policy declaration is still in effect.
Well, Congressman, what you're saying then is the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense Cohn, that the President and all his national security people, when they've all been on the Sunday programs and they're all denying categorically that U.S. troops are going to be used on the ground, you're admitting you think it's a lie, and you think the strategy of the administration is, in fact, to put 21-year-old men and women in harm's way in Kosovo to fight a war there.
Wouldn't it be crazy for them to telegraph what they're going to do in the field?
I think it's outrageous that the President lies to us, myself. I don't want to hear a lie again.
But why do we need all this military information? Let them win the thing and then come back to us.
If it's to end genocide, he should do all of that.
There are some things that we just can't turn our eyes from. When someone is going through the heart of Europe
But don't forget, this is an area just above Macedonia. We know that we have two NATO allies. They're already at each other's throats, and Macedonia could bring them both together again in opposite, against each other, Turkey and Greece. You can't let this thing
And then what happens when we're done? When we're done,
is.
we leave. Remember when the Britons left the Sudan and everything fell apart? What happens when we leave here?
Well,
the same thing. How long are we prepared to stay in this part of the globe?
If we declare that we recognize an independent Kosova, I believe the Albanian people, as they did for many years when Kosova was an equal part of that confederal presidency, they had their own parliament. They had their own police force. They had their own everything.
And we can just walk away and act like we don't even have to be there, and that's going to happen. Democratization is going to take place.
You don't have
it didn't happen in Haiti. It didn't happen in Somalia. Why would it happen here?
Because I think the Albanian people are smart enough to put back the infrastructure they need to rule themselves. If we don't do something now, we will lose total credibility. The United States, NATO, we have let a two-bit dictator run us into the ground. How many times can we accept? Well,
United States?
Promises. How many promises has he made? Holbrooke's been there, Dayton Peace Accords, and by the way, he listened to Milosevic and kept the Albanians away from the table at Dayton, and that sowed the seeds of the problem we got right now. And how many times in between did Milosevic say he was going to do something and didn't do it?
The major lesson of Vietnam was don't get involved in a civil war. Another lesson was make sure it certainly is.
Kosova has its own government, had its own self-administration, had an equal vote to Serbia.
You know,
Kosova in its constitution had an equal vote to Serbia in the confederal presidency.
What kind of message does that send to those innocent Serbians?
It sends a good message to the Albanians who are being killed as we speak. Executed.
What about the innocent Serbs who are victimized by Milosevic?
They should get rid of Milosevic to restore that flag back to honor. That's the way it goes.
You know.
I am not allowing my 21-year-old son to go. No American should go to that land and fight
You're
and
a
die
military
in that
man.
land.
We started this campaign. Now, NATO's 50th anniversary is coming up. We're about to go into the 21st century, and you want to shut this thing down, having lost?
All of a sudden, Milosevic is going to be responsive in a democratic manner to the people of his country?
I remember pictures in Romania, where you couldn't get rid of the Ceausescus, but finally they were chased like dogs into the courtyard and shot, and that's what's going to happen to Milosevic. His people can only be fooled so long.
Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Mary Tillotson. Today marks 1 week of the NATO air war against Yugoslavia. The NATO airstrikes designed to stop Serbs from attacking separatist Albanians in Kosovo have so far coincided with the harshest Serb sweep yet to force Albanians out of the province of Kosovo and across the border into Albania, Macedonia, and Montenegro. Albania, the most impoverished country in Europe, is feeling the brunt of that flood of refugees, a human upheaval that NATO officials are comparing to the dislocations of World War II. Joining our conversation now from New York, Shirley Cloyes, who is Balkan Affairs Advisor to the Albanian American Civic League. Good to have you with us. And joining us as well, former Republican member of Congress Helen Dilic-Bentley. She is of Serbian descent and led a delegation of Serbs to meet with State Department officials in Washington yesterday. She is in Washington, and so is Susan Page, who covers the White House for USA Today. We are very glad to have all three of you here today. A woman from Finland named Elizabeth Rand said that she now believes the only way to calm the situation in Kosovo is for ground troops to go in. Is that also what Albanians and Kosovo Albanians want of NATO at this point?
Well, Mary, the first thing they want, we think it will be faster and more effective, is to arm the Kosovo Liberation Army. They know where the tanks and the SAMs are on the ground and can greatly aid this process. The next step, undoubtedly, has to be, and as soon as possible, the deployment of NATO troops. Why? Because, as we all know, there are 4,000 Albanians an hour going into Albania.
Surely, is it the expectation of Albanians and Kosovo Albanians that absent someone like Primakov pulling a rabbit out of the hat and stopping all of the violence in Kosovo, that any NATO force, in addition to the airstrikes, is working on the behalf of Kosovo Albanians who want to be independent from Yugoslavia?
It's definitely working on the behalf of Kosovo Albanians. And Mr. Primakov will not, I have to add, pull a rabbit out of the hat. We've seen Slobodan Milosevic again and again from the time he invaded Kosovo in 1989, started a war in Slovenia, then a war in Croatia, then a war in Bosnia, killing 300,000 people and producing millions of refugees, now back in Kosovo. His MO is always the same.
Why is it in America's strategic interest to be working for an independent as opposed to autonomous Kosovo? Shirley?
Well, first of all, I've always wanted to know, how can we have autonomy under conditions of genocide? It's too late for that. The call for independence is a just call. We have given independence to Macedonia, to Croatia, to Serbia, to Bosnia. The Albanian issue is the unresolved issue of the Balkan conflict. But I must add, the first goal is that Albanians must live. We must remember that people are being executed on the spot right now, rounded up, their houses are being torched and looted, villages are being burned to the ground. The expulsion of the Albanians, which has been a plan in the Serbian government since Vaso Trebilovic published a book by that name in 1937.
Helen, what strategic interest is there in the United States for an independent Kosovo?
I have been asking that myself. What people don't understand is that Kosovo is to the Serbians what Jerusalem is to the Jews, what Mecca is to the Muslims, what Rome is to the Catholic. It's the birthplace of the Serbian Orthodox Church.
May I also ask this?
So
I'm not a historian, but I've had people who specialize in the area of Eastern Europe and the Balkans maintain that until Tito, the population in Kosovo was roughly 50-50 Serbian,
absolutely.
Albanian.
Tito in 1974 moved the Serbians out and pulled more and more Albanians in, and that's a matter of fact. That's
absolutely false, Congresswoman. That's absolutely
false. It's a matter
false.
of history.
No, it isn't. We have 92% Albanian population.
Right.
The Serbs took a land grab in 1912, 1913. The strategic interest of the United States is to stop the genocidal war of Milosevic that could eventually engulf the entire region.
Susan, this is not unfolding in the way the White House hoped it would, is it?
No, not at all. Now, of course, there were horrific incidents before the NATO bombing began, but there's no doubt that that has intensified as the bombing's gone on. And we've seen this terrific flood of refugees being forced out of Kosovo. That raises the possibility that we could win the military war but lose the political situation on the ground. We could save Kosovo for ethnic Albanians, and there won't be any of them there left to live there.
To Shirley Cloyes in New York, since the two primary stumbling blocks to Mr. Milosevic accepting the Rambouillet agreement seem to be, one, he did not want NATO troops on his sovereign turf of Yugoslavia to enforce a peace agreement in Kosovo. Two, that he was very uneasy, as most Serbians are, with the idea that after a 3-year period of autonomy to which they agreed, there would then be a vote implying NATO was siding with separatist independent forces in Kosovo. If there were an agreement that would let the displaced persons now in Macedonia, Montenegro, and Albania come home, admittedly a lot of those homes have been burned, and allow them autonomy without that promise of a 3-year vote on independence down the road, could that be acceptable to the Kosovar Albanians, Shirley?
First of all, we have to understand that while Rambouillet was going on for 3 weeks, 40,000 Serb troops and heavy artillery amassed on the borders of Kosova. That is why what has been happening this week is happening now. It's not because of the airstrikes. Slobodan Milosevic is saying what he thinks the international community would like to hear right now in order to stop the bombing of NATO. But what we finally have to do is indict Slobodan Milosevic as a war criminal in The Hague. He can no longer be the peacemaker in the Balkans.
Mr. Milosevic has violated every agreement he has made, including the recent one, the ceasefire in October. He put 40,000 troops into Kosovo recently in violation of that agreement with the M84 tanks. And by the way, last summer, over 250 Albanian villages were torched and ethically cleansed. No monitors were allowed into those villages. There may have been tens of thousands of Albanians already killed. So we're not getting the information. The worst thing that we're hearing is that we have almost 1 million refugees, displaced people in Kosovo, and they may be starving. Isn't that a good enough reason now to get on with this thing and finish it?
I think it's a great reason.
Arm the Kosovo Liberation Army. We armed the Croats.
You want to arm the KLA?
Why not? Didn't we arm the
terrorist
Croats?
group?
Didn't we? It's not. Where are you hearing that from? Mr. Schremek, the Serbs?
It's been all over the place.
Come on.
They're funded, but you deny that they're funded by drug. You deny that they're funded by drug money.
Absolutely. That's Milosevic.
Why don't we do something simple as we did in the Bosnian War? Arm the Kosovo Liberation Army. We gave arms to the Croatians. Why wouldn't we do it to the Kosovo Liberation
Well, you
Army?
want to send troops over there.
That'll come too.
We did this in the United States.
But you want U.S. ground
Give
troops.
them the weapons.
You want, that's not what you want.
That,
You want
let
ground
them do
troops.
some dirty work. They know where these
You want
service
American soldiers there.
Listen, America's part of NATO. NATO's committed here. The president has decided we're part of this, and finally he's using the right language for Milosevic.
You're saying
it's called
further.
Resolve. We should have shown that language before. Let's arm the KLA. This is exactly what we've seen from Tanjug, the controlled house organ of Milosevic, for at least the last 10 years. You know, they don't want to tell you this, Jane, but Kosovo had an equal vote to Serbia in the Confederal Republic of Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia. It had its own parliament. It had its own police force, its own judiciary. Milosevic walked in 1989 and stripped the Albanian people, 92% of the population, of everything. He created an apartheid, a Warsaw ghetto in the middle of Europe. And now
Mr.
you're hearing this
DioGuardi,
propaganda.
With all sincerity, American people cannot benefit from your statement because it's false.
Well, it's the truth. President Clinton did the right thing in starting the military strikes against Serbia. That's the only language Mr. Milosevic understands. But we need to arm the Kosovo Liberation Army to do some dirty work, and we need to commit the troops right away. We have to win this. We cannot lose it.
What's the end game here, and when is this going to end?
Well, the end game should be to end this as soon as possible. To do that, we should be taking the advice from the seasoned generals. Apply the resources
The
to
seasoned
this
generals
conflict.
want ground troops,
Arm the
right?
KLA, get the ground troops in there, shut this thing down. We're going to have more accidents. It's going to cost a fortune. What are we doing stretching this thing out? This is genocide. Don't be bashful about using the word. You know, we list 9 generals, and we forgot to put Milosevic at the top of the list.
Didn't even include him.
We have to include him. He's the one that's running the show. And we knew this from 10 years ago.
Slobodan Milosevic trying to play another bit of a chess game here with us?
Absolutely. We've seen this now for 10 years. When are we going to learn? This man has one objective, and that's to stay in power. He's a Stalinist communist. He's the last vestige of that in Europe today, and that's why he walked into Kosovo in '89 to dominate it when the Kosovars wanted democracy, and they tried very hard to get it. And then he went to Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia. He wants to dominate everything, and we shouldn't take one promise he makes at its face value. We must be able to see all his troops out. There's still a line in the sand. You know, I asked this question at a hearing in Congress on March 12th. What is our foreign policy since Bush said there's a line in the sand if you put one Serbian troop there, and then Clinton affirmed that when he came in? I'm told that's still our foreign policy. So why don't we hold out and say every troop has to leave? Why is that important? Well, the Albanian refugees won't come back.
But what about those who
all
say
about
he's
power.
already won? He's already won this campaign because he's driven most of the refugees out of Kosovo, and so therefore it doesn't matter if he comes to the table or not because he's achieved his aim.
No, he hasn't. That's what he wants you to believe and us to believe, that he's won. He has not won. He's in a bunker right now, as Hitler was at the end of the war. This could end immediately if we showed the resolve that we should have shown, by the way, years ago. We made so many foreign policy blunders under Baker and Bush, and now under President Clinton and Madeleine Albright and Holbrooke. We have to arm the Kosovo Liberation Army. We did it to the Croatians in the Bosnian War 2 years too late after we lost 250,000, and we have to commit the ground troops. We can win this, and we have to win it. We cannot allow Mr. Milosevic to win 1% of this for what he's done.
After 50-plus days of bombing, here it is, a deal. Milosevic wants it as long as he could save face.
We can't make any deal with Slobodan Milosevic. It's impossible. Anything we do with him will be a failure for the United States and NATO's credibility for years to come. The man's a war criminal. He's been declared as such by almost everybody, the U.S. Congress, the European Parliament. Why are we interested in doing something with him? Are we interested in long-term peace and stability in the Balkans? We need to have the Albanians return. If Clinton sticks, he's got 5 points. The first 2 points are the most powerful. If he sticks with those, that all Serb troops have to be removed and all refugees have to be returned, Milosevic will not buy it, and we're going to bomb him in the bunker just like we did. I can't believe that we're not listening to the experts. Right from the beginning, we were told that an air war would not work. And if our goal was to save the Albanians inside,
Obviously, we're not accomplishing that
It's not going to
goal.
be. All right, now next question.
So why are we implementing policies that accomplish the goals of NATO and the United States? Is there another deal here? I keep saying this. I don't know.
You think there might be?
Are we this dumb? I hope not.
Well,
but I can tell you the only solution for Kosovo, I got to phrase it right here, is independence.
I would just say this, the Kosovars have always been willing to fight their own battles.
Exactly.
Our biggest mistake so far is we haven't armed and trained the Kosovars to fight their own battles.
No one trusts Slobodan Milosevic, correct? I think we all agree on that. And it's ludicrous to me that when he's on the ropes, when Clinton's strategy finally worked, no ground troops, he pounded Milosevic. Milosevic doesn't give ice away in the winter, and he's saying, let's have peace. Why? The man has been decimated.
We pledged 70,000 U.S. ground troops
that's what we pledged.
as a peacekeeping force.
That's what we pledged, but right now the Serb soldiers are deserting. The KLA has become effective. He's losing. He knows it, so he's crying uncle. So what do? We say, let's have peace.
Hasn't he already won, Colonel McGinn?
I don't understand. You don't see this, Congressman. You're shocking me here tonight. You don't see. This is a done deal. I guarantee you, the president's made the deal.
You are naive.
I would say the same to you.
You think the Albanians will go back? The whole deal is to get the Albanians back.
Yes.
They will not go back if there's one Serb soldier left there.
It doesn't matter. He's going to be in power. He's going to have his military.
Listen,
and Clinton wanted a
can I
deal
say
because
something?
this is all politics.
Can I say,
for him.
after what the Albanians have been through since Tito died, don't forget, this didn't start 2 years ago. Started in 1980, and then it was escalated in 1989 with the occupation. Do you think that the Albanians will stand by while Milosevic comes back to the table?
I am telling you that Clinton has sold you out. Clinton has never been in this for principle. Clinton is in this. He's scared to death of his poll.
If they don't take Milosevic down, the Albanian people have learned from the Jewish people. They're going to go after him like they went after Adolf Hitler. Mr. Milosevic has lost. And I believe, and all Albanians believe, that it should be an unconditional surrender. We shouldn't be dealing with a war criminal. He should be now accepting our terms, and I hope that the bombing intensifies until these generals realize that they have lost and that they have to pay the price for the brutality that we've witnessed, not only in the last 2 years. Don't forget, this aggression started in 1989 when Milosevic walked into Kosova with tanks and took away their autonomy. Haven't we seen Milosevic break every promise that he's made? And that's why you must keep up the bombing. In fact, I think you have to intensify the bombing. There was a poll done overnight that says that 70% of the people, more than 70%, do not trust Slobodan Milosevic, and 63% say, keep the bombing until we have this deal solidified. Milosevic has lost. That's why he's crying uncle. When someone loses, and NATO was won, we must impose our terms.
I have to ask you, though, has he really lost? I mean, haven't a lot of his objectives absolutely been met? I mean, how many Kosovar Albanians are left in that country? And for the ones who aren't there, what do they have to go back to? Not a whole heck of a lot.
Shepard, he's now an indicted war criminal. All the infrastructure in Serbia, bridges, electricity, trains, the military infrastructure, gone. He's got the worst reputation now in the world as a war criminal. The Serbian people have been brought down to their knees economically. Yes, the Albanians are out, but they must return because we cannot allow this to stand in this century. While we were talking at Rambouillet, Milosevic was marching 40,000 troops and tanks into Kosovo. Here we're talking, President is claiming victory, and the Russians, for a whole day, nonstop, just keep going from Bosnia to Yugoslavia to Kosovo. That's not by accident. Yeltsin said he had deployed the troops.
So far, what is the damage of that, though, Joseph? What damage has been done?
All right, number one, the big damage is that the goal is to return all the Albanians. They will not come back if they sense that security is not there, and they only trust NATO at this point. They will not trust the Russians. And this is now an intimidation factor to keep them out. Everyone wants to go back to their homes. Listen to the refugees being interviewed. They say, keep bombing Milosevic. Yes, we will go back to our homes. This is their ancestral lands. They've been there for 10,000 years. Don't believe the propaganda of Slobodan Milosevic. He's poisoned the minds of the Serbian people, and he's certainly poisoned the minds of the Serbian American people. I can't imagine what I'm hearing from the Serbian Unity Conference and these organizations.
He's served in the United States Congress as a certified public accountant. He's written a book entitled Unaccountable Congress, addressing what he sees as reckless spending in Washington. But when he became president of the Albanian American Civic League about a decade ago, Hudson Valley resident Joe DioGuardi was thrust into a role that has taken him to the front lines in his stand to fight for those who are being oppressed. You've been fighting for causes out on the front lines with energy that has been amazing to your pros and your opponents for years. This has been a tough one for you, hasn't it? Just kind of exploded on the scene.
Well, I brought this issue, the issue of Kosova and some of the most egregious human rights violations.
Now you say Kosova because it's no longer Kosovo, as people say.
That's what the Serbs use. It's really Kosova. The Albanians call it Kosova. And they don't believe it's part of Yugoslavia, by the way.
Yes.
They're going for their own state. In fact, that's one of the reasons I brought this nice bumper sticker over there, Independence for Kosova, the only way to peace and stability in the Balkans. Okay. This issue is not just for the Kosovars, it's for peace in the Balkans, and the Balkans is of vital interest to the United States of America. But Terrence, I brought this issue to Congress in 1986. It's an unbelievable story. You know how congressmen raise money at birthday parties? Well, on my first...
Hey, today's your birthday too, right?
It is.
I don't just want to say happy birthday to you, but go ahead.
But on my birthday, my first birthday as a congressman in 1985, some Albanians who came with one of my friends, another ethnic group, overheard my father speaking Albanian to his younger sister. And it was amazing. They came to me and said, "How is your father speaking Albanian?" And I explained that while he was born in Italy, that 500 years before, his people, my people, fled the Ottoman Turks because they didn't want to be part of an empire that would take away their Christian religion and do so many other things.
And at that time, though, you were going to Congress to fight for other things. In your mind, you weren't thinking this. How long did it take you to say, you know, this is a cause that I really think I want to throw myself into, because the commitment is big time?
Well, it didn't take too long, because the next day after that birthday party, 20 Albanians from Kosova came to my house in New Rochelle to tell me about a place I never heard of, Kosova. And when I went to Congress, I found out that very, very few senators or House members knew about it. Tom Lantos did, a Hungarian Democrat, born over there. He knew it. Ben Gilman knew it because he was in international relations, but very few people knew it. At that point, I was working actively on the Soviet Jewry issue, working with Tom Lantos on the rights for the people of Tibet. And then what I did in talking to Lantos is say, why can't we add this one to the Congressional Human Rights Caucus? So I had to make the case, because these Albanians every week would send me horrific pictures. You think
back in 85,
back
right?
in 85, 86.
Of people just sliced.
Once Tito died in 1980.
Explain to Tito who Tito is.
Tito was the head of Yugoslavia. He was the one, half Croatian, married to a Serb, who saw that ultranationalism would kill Yugoslavia. So he created a balance. Fearing that the Serbs were the most nationalistic, he gave the Albanians status as what they called then an autonomous province.
Right.
Equal in status to Serbia. Right. Equal vote in the 8-person confederal presidency, everything. As soon as Tito died, the Serbs came in and took it away. And then finally in 1989 with Milosevic, actually walked in with tanks and took everything away from Kosova. Its parliament, its schools, its hospitals. For 10 years, Kosova, until the bombing, was an apartheid, was another Warsaw ghetto in the middle of Europe. Yugoslavia has disintegrated, and we ought to let the process continue. Slovenia has gone, Croatia has gone, Macedonia has gone, Bosnia-Herzegovina has gone.
But do you agree with Danielle that we shouldn't intervene? That's up to these folks to decide their business.
But we are right now, as the United Nations,
Yugoslavia is a country, and whether you like to admit it or not.
Yugoslavia is not recognized by the United Nations right now.
And a nation.
Yeah, but let me say this.
I know you wouldn't like
any state that kills its own people,
any
state that kills its own people cannot be considered a state, and that's what they've been doing. Final thought is that I think democracy is in the air. Let's hope now that the Albanians can get what they deserve, which is self-determination, independence under international law.
U podršci albanskom separatizmu i terorizmu na Kosovu i Metohiji posebno se angažovala albanska emigracija u zemljama Zapadne Evrope i SAD. U Americi je 86. godine još osnovana Albansko-američka civilna liga pod predsjedništvom uticajnog kongresmena Josefa DioGuardija, čiji je zadatak bio da aktivno lobira na Capitol Hillu za zahteve i ciljeve kosovskih Albanaca. Aktivnim lobiranjem Liga je otvorila put kosovsko-metohijskim separatistima za zvanične kontakte u Američkom senatu i Kongresu. U svakom slučaju, Albansko-američka civilna liga je u mnogome doprinela sistematskom širenju antisrpskog raspoloženja i satanizaciji srpskog naroda u američkoj javnosti.
Hello, I'm former Congressman Joe DioGuardi, the president of the Albanian American Civic League.
You have just heard former Serbian dictator and indicted war criminal Slobodan Milosevic misrepresent our important work in Washington to free Kosova and all Albanians from the tyranny of his regime. You can help us and all Albanians by becoming a member of the Albanian American Civic League. Please join us and become a member now by visiting the website of the Albanian American Civic League.